All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our final session of the conference. If you can take a seat. All right, so I'm excited for this final session. We started off the conference talking about the state of the foundation, particularly our focus on research. And we talked about kind of where we've been. And in this session, we're looking ahead as far as what's next and what we can do to accelerate our research readiness. We know we're working on the basic tools for that, but we had mentioned, we need a map. How do we best identify those gaps in what we need to do for research? And then how do we prioritize those investments that we have at the foundation and that continued fundraising that we know we have to do to keep accelerating what we can do for our kids? So Libby and I had the opportunity to go to a RareX summit, and we had the pleasure of meeting more of the RareX team beyond Megan O'Boyle, who I will still call extraordinaire, even though she doesn't like me saying that. And they are impressed by our community, if I can say so, particularly the enrollment and the participation that we have in their platform. And so they talked to us about joining a pilot program for them. And so we are excited to share this announcement. And I have the pleasure of introducing Carmen Trupek. She is the Senior Director of Scientific Programs with RareX, and she works with patient organizations like ours to help kind of chart that path for research readiness. So I'll let Carmen, she's joining us online, introduce herself and go through kind of what that could mean for our community. And then we'll do a little Q&A at the end. Carmen, are you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, there you are.
Yes, here I am. Hi. So I am delighted to have the chance to speak with you today. That was not an incorrect statement. We at RareX are totally impressed with this patient community and your willingness to just step right in and start collecting data on the data collection platform. I think part of what you will appreciate as I lay out our plans and what we're going to do together is how critical your engagement and your participation is in that project. So I guess she asked me to introduce myself. Carmen Trupek. By background and training, I'm a clinical genetic counselor. I've worked in clinical genetics for rare diseases for 21 years and worked in a variety of different environments in academia and telemedicine and building out collaborative programs between patient advocacy groups and biotech and pharma companies and community level physicians and hospitals to really improve the diagnosis and management of patients with rare genetic diseases. And throughout, I've been really involved in clinical research for a number of those rare diseases. So here at RareX, I'm really trying to take that and translate it into accelerating progress in therapeutic development for our rare disease partners. Am I going to share slides or are you guys advancing my slides? Oh, you're going to do it, it looks like. Yep. Okay, great. All right. So when a patient advocacy organization is trying to assess and determine what should we be working on, what should we be prioritizing when we think about research studies, research projects, what are the types of programs and projects that we should really be trying to fund, that we should be putting our energies into and trying to back, that will really help us to get to clinical trials faster. And when patient advocates go out and they talk to various different stakeholders and experts, they hear many, many different opinions. So they might hear from one expert that what you need more than anything else is a mouse model. And they'll hear from another expert, what you really need is a natural history study. And somebody else will tell them like, well, do you collect biospecimens? Are you developing stem cells? Like, that's the most critical thing you can do. And it can be very, very difficult to figure out what of all of those things to start with, how to prioritize them, because you don't have the funding or the resources to be able to do them all at once. And so that's where this project really got started, is working side by side with our patient advocacy group partners to very systematically go about these questions and help come up with a roadmap at the end that will really do that, that will identify where are the biggest gaps for research readiness and how do we help you prioritize those. So here's an example. I think this is a terrific example. And this was not something that we initiated, but it's a really good example of another rare disease organization that did this. So the KIF1A organization, they undertook a project that they called Path to Treatment. And they spent a couple of years working on this and iterating on it. But essentially, this is what they did, is they laid out what's all the research that has occurred, what's currently ongoing right now, what are the gaps, what do we need to work on, and then they started systematically approaching them. This organization was founded in 2017, and in 2020, so 3 years later, they had a collaboration with Ovid Therapeutics and Columbia University Medical Center to work together in those 3 parts, to work together toward meaningful therapies and clinical trials. That's pretty huge. So for an organization to get started and 3 years later have this kind of strategic partnership to work toward therapies, that's what we want to replicate across rare disorders. Okay. So we have at RareX, we have a number of partners, and those partners are really, really engaged and totally behind this effort. In fact, the reason that we first started developing the framework for this project was that we have a corporate advisory council, and RareX is a nonprofit organization. So why do we have a corporate advisory council? It is because we want all of the data that we collect to genuinely advance therapeutic research. And the people doing the therapeutic research, by and large, are biotech and pharma companies. Obviously, a lot of that is also done in basic science research labs, but that translational piece occurs with these biotech and pharma companies. And so we want to work with them every step of the way to understand what they need. And this is something that they said they need. They need for communities to really understand what are the things we need to do to make our community clinical trial ready, and what are the things that we need to prioritize in order to de-risk investment from those companies. We have a number of other partners outside of biotech and pharma who are very committed to helping us in this endeavor. And so, we're not doing this alone, and we're not even just doing it, in partnership, just us and WSS. This is kind of a larger effort. Okay. So there are really a number of different benefits to doing this kind of program. And, I think based on what we've laid out already, it's pretty obvious that there are benefits to the patient advocacy organization in really understanding that landscape and moving forward into meaningful therapeutic research. But for therapy developers as well, this is really critical. And the number one thing that therapy developers say is that they need to feel confident that a community is really ready to participate in clinical trials and clinical research. And when they're looking for evidence that a community is ready, is clinical trial ready, a big part of that is, do they have an engaged community that is actively participating and sharing data in some way? Because that tells them that community will also be ready when it's time to enroll a clinical trial. Okay, so I've been working on this project in collaboration with Rachel Groth, who's a neuroscientist who serves on our scientific advisory board and also our corporate advisory council. So she's kind of like the link between those two for us at RareX. And she and I have been developing this together. And when we got started, we reviewed a number of other similar programs that have been done and reviewed a lot of what industry has needed when they first go to the FDA and submit an application for a clinical trial. And we compiled that into these categories. So disease biology characterization are things like, is the gene known? Do we know what kinds of mutations occur within the gene? And are the outcomes associated with those different types of mutations different? Are there, when it says relevant in vitro and in vivo models, that really just means, are there mouse models or other animal models? Are there iPS cells available to test? So all of that fits under disease biology. Under therapeutic readiness, is there a druggable target? And that's closely actually affiliated with the last one. Is there a therapeutic window? So essentially, what of the symptoms is treatable and what is the window in which those are treatable? Clinical trial readiness is a little bit different in this framework here than what I've been describing as your community's research readiness. And here what we really mean is clinical trial readiness at the clinical trial sites or the potential clinical trial sites. So are there biomarkers? A biomarker would be anything that is measurable. Think about something that might be done from like a blood draw and test, though it doesn't have to be that. So anything that is easily quantifiable and measurable that would be likely to show a difference on therapy. Are there established clinical trial endpoints? So beyond biomarkers, are there things that are more impactful to that patient or that family's life? So in some therapies, that would be something like a significant reduction in seizure activity. In another disorder, it might be that there is a significant improvement in GI dysfunction. And then what are the number and distribution of physicians with expertise? So if there are only 2 in the United States who really have ever done any kind of particular research or multidisciplinary clinic affiliated with a particular rare disease, then that might be one of the things we want to work on, is trying to develop a couple of more sites. And then patient population engagement is the how can you help and what can you do? And there's so much here. We all know that the diagnostic journey for many patients with rare diseases is way, way too long. And part of what we are doing within the RareX platform will be able to collect some of that diagnostic history and really get that in quantifiable numbers and kind of story paths, which will be really, really valuable in thinking about how to improve and shorten that time to diagnosis. Is there a patient registry? Obviously, yes, we now have a patient registry with RareX. You guys are crushing enrollment. It's amazing, truly amazing. You guys are doing a great job. The very last one is kind of interesting. Is there a prioritized list of disease symptoms with regard to impact to quality of life? So this is something that is actually really, really critical. So therapy developers want to ensure that the therapies they develop are actually super meaningful to the patients being tested. It's not helpful if they develop a therapy that very significantly improves function in one area if it doesn't actually improve your quality of life much. And that is also something that will be systematically collected through the surveys on the RareX platform. Okay. All right, this is super, super busy, but there's no expectation that anybody's going to read most of this, but this is our very first pilot that we're just nearing completion of with a genetic disorder called FOXP1 syndrome. And so we went through and did this activity with them and with the input of a number of different experts who've done research, clinical research and laboratory research. So we've had a number of meetings with different experts about this disease, and we've pulled together different publications and really come to this kind of outcome that you can very easily at a glance see at the top. Causal gene, done. We know the gene FOXP1 and we know what it does. But then you get kind of further along and there are a lot of open-ended questions. The therapeutic readiness, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and that will be clearly on their priority list. So if you move to the second one. And then here are those other two categories: clinical trial readiness and patient population and engagement. So, here I circled that they too have a patient registry launched on RareX. They have enrolled 75, I think now actually it's like 82 or something patients for a very rare disease. This is really interesting. And we've already had some researchers ask us about how they can collaborate with us because this number is so impressive. And the same thing is very clearly going to happen with your community. Okay. All right, so what are our next steps together? Here's where we are right now. We sent a structured survey out to the WSS leadership, and they distributed that to a number of different clinical and laboratory research experts to get their insights and input. When we get that back, we will compile all those responses, we'll review relevant publications, reconcile any kind of discrepancies, get back with those experts if there are any additional questions, and then we'll come back and we'll meet back with the leadership of your group, and we will invite any of those experts that we reached out to who are interested in specifically collaborating into a meeting, because that can influence the final prioritization. If there are specific research groups who are really, really interested in helping to fill in some of these gaps and working together, we will then take our draft research readiness roadmap to our scientific advisory board. Our scientific advisory board includes a number of different individuals who've spent most of their career in early therapeutic development, and a big part of their job has been to assess the research readiness, the clinical trial readiness of communities, and make a determination about whether or not their company could really invest in that disease. And so they will help us to do that final prioritization, and then we'll get a final report back to the community. This whole process should probably take about 3 or 4 months. And then we will have that final prioritized report to get started on. So I think there's just one last slide. Yep, here it is. So here's how all of you can help. Obviously, not all of you are going to be intimately involved in this project that we're doing for the research readiness, but all of you can help in this final category, this final bucket of patient population and engagement. Joining the RareX registry is so, so important to showing researchers that we have an engaged, committed community. When natural history studies start opening up, consider participating. And if you can't participate, consider reaching out and sharing your voice about why. What are the barriers to clinical trial participation? I think so often historically in clinical trials, what's happened is that we have these very strict criteria. Certain patients and families can participate, many can't, and they're just kind of lost. And we don't want that. We want to find out, what are the barriers to participate? What could we do differently? How could we convince the sponsor that this needs to be tweaked in some way to really much more broadly engage and enroll a larger number of patients. And then I think I already mentioned that prioritized list of disease symptoms with respect to quality of life will be systematically collected and addressed within the RareX surveys. This is something that historically biotech and pharma companies have gone out and tried to do like an individual survey for and tried to get that information. But that will all be systematically collected and available for any company that is interested. Okay, that's it. Super happy to take your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Carmen. Can we get a round of applause? And I love the enthusiasm from Tori, Susan. This is a big deal. A community like ours to have a partner like RareX, of all the rare diseases that they're working with, to say, your community, we want to work with you and build a roadmap just for WSS. I mean, that's exciting. And for us, surrounding ourselves with smart people like Carmen and their corporate advisory board is really comforting for us to figure out our next steps. So Libby and I have a few questions as you might think about yours. We just have some time here, Carmen. And so our first one is, we've been hearing a lot about in rare diseases, the opportunity to work with other patient organizations. And we do appreciate your platform because you've really made that easy for us across different symptoms. So I guess, can you share a little bit more about your vision as you how do we better unite with other rare diseases on your platform and accelerate maybe treatment that's going on in another disease that could be used for WSS or vice versa?
Yep. So this is a great question. And it's one that very much gets to the heart of how RareX was founded and got started, which is that so often in clinical research, individual questions, individual surveys have been designed for very rare, very specific diseases. And when that always happens individually like that, that means that cross-disorder research and comparison is extremely difficult to do. So we have really designed the way that our platform asks questions to primarily ensure that everything is systematic, that every pediatric neurodevelopmental disorder we'll be collecting essentially the same kinds of data. And that makes that cross-disorder comparison super, super easy to do. And one of the things that we hope to do with that, and we actually already have a pilot that is similar to this right now, is we want to advance what we call basket-style natural history studies. So a natural history study is where, without treatment, a clinical research group will follow a group of patients over time. So longitudinally, usually, not always, but usually longitudinally over time. And those can be extremely expensive and, difficult to get all of the resources to do for a single really rare disease. But if multiple rare diseases that have some shared symptoms or shared underlying disease biology pull together and do a shared natural history study, they can really distribute some of those costs amongst them. They can get more researchers, both academic researchers and biotech and pharma researchers, really interested in that project. And hopefully they can identify opportunities for cross-disorder therapeutics.
Thank you, Carmen. This is Libby. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon as we close things out. But another question that we had was, in your experience with the rare disease space and these small patient advocacy groups, what are the biggest challenges for patient communities getting to the next step of drug development? Obviously, the first step is doing these surveys, but obviously money's evolved. Obviously, attracting pharma attention is involved, but as a community, what can we expect and the barriers and challenges with that?
Yeah. I think historically, what has happened with most disease communities, rare and non-rare, actually, what has happened with most disease communities when it comes to clinical trials and clinical research is those communities kind of just wait for somebody to pick up the phone and call them and tell them that you might qualify for a particular clinical trial. It's been a very passive process. Like as a community, maybe we're going to fund some research and then we're just going to sit and wait and see what happens. And, hopefully they'll get to clinical trials faster because we're helping to fund their research, but we're not really intimately involved in that process in any way. And that paradigm is totally starting to change. We're definitely seeing that change. And we very much want to be kind of a conduit in helping organizations be part of that change. And so what does that really mean? Well, it means that we want the data that you're collecting to actively be part of what clinical researchers look at for how they design their clinical trials, so that they don't design these clinical trials that are super, super narrow with regard to inclusion-exclusion criteria that a very small percentage of your patient population will actually be able to enroll in. So we want to collect that data and make sure they have that data and have conversations back and forth as those trials are being designed. We also want to collect patient-reported outcome measures. So your community is going to see a big push from us at RareX in December when we launch a bunch of clinical outcome assessment measures. So these are measures that some of you are very familiar with doing in the clinic, some of you are not, but they're typically used in clinical research. We've licensed them, we're implementing them on our platform. Patient-reported outcome measures are intended to really help researchers see what is the actual impact to a family's life. So let's say it's sleep. There would be a whole survey around sleep that is very systematic, that is designed to see what is the impact of this disease to sleep and if that is a really significant part of this condition, and there is a clinical trial that is addressing that, maybe that can be used as one of the endpoints, something they measure in the clinical trial. And the FDA is extremely interested in patient-reported outcome measures and incorporating them into clinical trials. And so we're having active conversations with them around the ones that we're collecting on our platform and how to make sure that we're working side by side with them, the FDA, so that they have those available to them when they're going and talking to biotech and pharma companies.
Thank you.
And that's exciting to kind of see the potential of that acceleration, Carmen. But many in this room might be thinking about time. And what's your sense of the timelines for meaningful treatments and other innovation that you're seeing within the industry?
Yeah, so this is always a really hard question to try to come up with a timeline. I will say there are a number of things that have happened within the field broadly where we've seen acceleration in the whole journey, start to finish, in clinical trials and clinical therapeutic development. Like one example would be that historically, all clinical trials went through 3 phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And that historically has been an extremely long process, like 15 years start to finish. That has really changed. And in rare diseases now, we almost always see just 2. And so essentially, like some of the components of phase 1 and 2, they've combined into a phase 1/2. And some of the components of 2, they move up into the other one. So now that there's just 2 phases, but because we can take insights from related rare diseases and related studies, they've also accelerated each one. So now that whole path is not a 15-year path anymore. In some instances, that might be like a 6-year path. But I think that what's even more critical to that, to shortening that timeline, honestly, is that the number one thing we need to do to accelerate timelines is to get biotech and pharma companies working on your disease sooner, right? Because that whole timeline I just described only starts when there is a therapeutic being developed. So how do we get from today to that therapeutic starting to be developed? That's the piece that we need to really work to accelerate. And that's where, like the example I showed you right at the top with the KIF1A group, they really did the same kind of project to de-risk investment from biotech and pharma. And, I'll tell you, and this is going to be shocking to some people in the room. It's terrible, but true, that the number one reason for failed clinical trials in rare diseases to date has been the inability to fully enroll. That is terrible. And we have to fix that. And what you're doing is going to fix that, because we will have an engaged, committed community that is ready to rise up and participate.
Well, I think we're ready. Based on the numbers that we've already demonstrated in your platform, and hence your last point there, the need for a map to get that pharmaceutical company on board. We might just have a minute or two for any questions from the audience, if there's any burning ones to ask our expert here. Yes.
Carmen, if you can, I don't know if you can see, but we have a lot of kiddos in costume ready to have a dance party. So
I love it.
Hello, Carmen. This is Krish over here. Thanks for your talk. It was really interesting. I have like 2 very short questions. The first is, how much is enough? I saw that your KIF1A, the collaboration between the company and the society happened after just 75 patients, if I'm not wrong. So we already have 100 like registrations at least. So what number do you think sort of entices the pharma companies, like the minimum numbers you would say?
That really depends disease to disease, because if we were talking about cystic fibrosis today, 100 patients wouldn't be nearly enough. That is a much more common disease, and the clinical trials are a lot larger than what they are in more rare diseases. And the FDA very much looks at this like that what is the overall size of the community and what's reasonable to expect. So that number is hard. I would say that where you're at today is such a beautiful start. Like, it's already kind of eye-opening to some research groups, which is so great. But having people in the registry is not the same thing as having kind of all the data that we need in the registry. So as we continue to put out surveys, particularly those neurodevelopmental surveys in December, getting that data will provide a richness to the data that will be really critical. I think the other piece around numbers is that we have to get to diagnoses faster. And in the United States, we have a big have and have not around whether or not patients have insurance and whether or not their insurance will approve it, but it's getting better and better. But globally, in a lot of places in the world, genetic testing is not something that people have easy access to. And in rare diseases, our trials must be global. So we are actually at RareX, we are actually working on developing programming that is going to roll out next year around working together with some partners to increase access to genetic testing globally, rolling out in a number of markets for children with neurodevelopmental disorders, to really like shorten that timeline to accurate diagnosis and get families globally involved. And as we begin to do that and identify patients with WSS, we'll be referring them to your organization and looking at where those global communities begin to pop up, and how we can engage them thinking about clinical research.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question. This short. Like you talked about a process, like within 3 to 4 months, we'll be knowing about the next steps. And if a company or an industry partner is interested or not to, take it up as a therapeutic target or anything like that. I'm being a bit negative, but what if no company shows an interest? What would be the next steps then?
So I'm glad you asked that question, because I think maybe the way I said it's overpromised. In 3 to 4 months, we're going to have kind of a product to deliver to your community. That's not the same thing as we're going to go out and do a pitch to all of the biotech and pharma companies out there and hopefully have investment in 3 or 4 months. That's going to take more time. We will get there. I don't know what the timeline is for that. I know that it will be shorter than if we didn't do this work. And I know that's nebulous, but it's kind of the best I can do.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, thank you.
Final question. Hi, Carmen. I'm Megan O'Boyle.
Megan!
Can you, in terms of diversity, you started to talk about it, but it's not that we just need people from different countries, different stages of disease, different ages, different symptoms. Can you talk a little bit about how important getting the whole spectrum of WSS is?
Yep. That's a great question. So historically, a lot of rare disease data has been collected in pediatric centers, fully around kind of the early pediatric experience, around the time that families are getting diagnosed, and then in the years that follow. And so we really do have a lack of data in a lot of rare diseases in older patient populations. And, having this platform available for any family to be able to participate and put information in there is a really, really critical piece of this, and is important, because we need to understand, if we are really developing therapeutics, what are the types of therapeutics that might be really beneficial to older patients. And we won't know that if we don't have data on those patients.
Thank you, Carmen. With that, I think we're ready to wrap up, and we so appreciate our partnership. I think it was a lot of being in the right place at the right time. Christina at the bar at the Rare X Summit. So, so we appreciate it. We look forward to what's to come, and can't thank you enough.
Yeah, have a great party.
And in closing here, I know I stand between you and getting out and being able to take a deep breath and just reflect on our time together. But I just want to thank you on behalf of the board of directors for being here. We know that it's a huge effort, missing work, getting your WSS warrior here is not always easy and takes some extra efforts. So thank you for making that commitment to being here and being with our community. And I hope that you are leaving here with a fuller toolbox, feeling supported, having formed a lot of you, just seeing everybody sit down. This was your first conference. That I remember that feeling, and it's magic. And hopefully you have made some connections and some lifelong friendships, which is, I think, the biggest pro of this diagnosis is all of you, and getting to know people that we would have never met before. And as a foundation, I want you to know that we pledge to really focus on building our community further through vehicles like our Regional Ambassador Program and education like our speaker series, and very much recognize that on the research side of things, kind of our third bucket, there is so much that we don't know, and we are fully aware of that, but are surrounding ourselves with people like our partnership with Rare X and our scientific advisory board. It's that constant check and feedback to make sure that we're on the right track, to make sure that your kiddos live their best lives to their fullest potential. They are the backbone of why we're doing what we're doing. And the question always is, you know, everybody feels hopefully a little bit more inspired to help our community. Data like that submitted to RareX is currency. Without that data, we can't do a lot. And you're advocating for your child, advocating for our community, and spreading awareness. And maybe the elephant is fundraising, but that data and money are a combination. So if you have any questions about fundraising, if you want to throw any ideas off, our board members are always happy to have those discussions with you. But thank you for being here. We have a reception set up in the lobby there, but before that, we're going to do a quick photo on the patio. And again, thank you.